In dealing with history, and particularly in dealing with prehistory, there is a difference because history is based primarily upon written documents, and prehistory you're dealing with objects, artifacts that are dug up out of the ground. In an ideological war, what you try to do is to destroy your opponent in any way, fair or foul. And it's helped me to understand that there is an ideological war over our past. For more than a quarter of a century, I have been focusing on the possibility of a forgotten episode in human history, of a lost civilization. In 1995, I made a very clear statement that my evidence suggested very strongly that there had been a global cataclysm somewhere around 12,500 years ago, 10,500 BC. Something awful had happened to the world. And I explored quite a number of possibilities as to what that could have been. But what then happened as we come through 2007, 2008, 2010, is this mass of new evidence that comes out on precisely what I was talking about, a global cataclysm. And the dating on it, and this is science, this is not some journalist sitting writing a book at home. This is 60 leading scientists in the field of astrophysics and geology, very strongly and firmly presenting evidence of a global cataclysm caused by a comet impact 12,800 years ago. So I was 300 years out in the estimate that I put forward in Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995. And more than 10 years later, science comes back with new information. But what happened is that really in 1995, I was treated by the scientific community as a total outsider. How dare he speak about this? He knows nothing about this. We are the experts, and he's wrong. And what's happened since 1995 is that the evidence drip by drip has kept on coming in that actually validates what I was saying before, that there are missing episodes in the human story. A huge development was the site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, along with others like John Anthony West and Robert Schoch. I'd been arguing for a long time that the Sphinx is much older than it's supposed to be, that we're looking at a 12,000-year-old monument, not a 4,500-year-old monument. And the response of the skeptical community to that was, but if there was a civilization capable of creating something like the Sphinx 12,000 years ago, then they must have created other monuments. And we don't see any big monuments from 12,000 years ago. And therefore, the Sphinx must be the age we say it is. And then what happens? Klaus Schmidt and the German Archaeological Institute discover Göbekli Tepe, and lo and behold, it's 11,600 to 12,000 years old, exactly in the window of the Sphinx. Firmly dated, no dispute about it, a giant megalithic site. When you're looking for a lost civilization, and I mean a civilization, something that we would recognize as a civilization, I'll tell you directly, I don't think they flew to the moon, and I don't think they had airplanes. But I think that we're talking about a civilization more than 12,000 years ago, which was as advanced as our civilization was, say, in the late 18th century or early 19th century. In other words, they could navigate the world. They could explore the world. They could measure the Earth accurately. They had precise astronomy. They could create beautiful maps that were accurate in terms of latitude and longitude, that kind of level of civilization. That's what was sitting there. Now, you need a place where such a civilization can evolve, and you need to explain why archaeology hasn't found it yet. And I've considered many possibilities over the years. Back in 1995 with Fingerprints of the Gods, Antarctica looked very interesting to me. Later I became very interested in what's called the Sunda Shelf, which is the area of land around what's now the Malaysian Peninsula and the Indonesian islands out to the Philippines. That was a continent-sized landmass that was above water during the Ice Age and is underwater now. Very interesting to look there and see what's going on there. But the one place that nobody ever looked, precisely because of the ideology, precisely because of what we've been taught about the Americas, was the America. Nobody looked there. It was not considered worth looking there. And I think that's a huge mistake because the Americas stand out as a candidate with this amazing richness of resources. And then the second thing, because of the character of the Ice Age, there were long periods when the Americas were cut off from the rest of the world, cut off from the conflicts and the difficulties going on in the so-called Old World. What a beautiful and amazing place for a civilization to evolve, a civilization that was separate, that was different, that had its own way of doing things. That is one of the reasons why I think we need to take America very, very seriously, because We now know that the archaeological story we've been taught about the Americas is complete and utter bullshit from beginning to end. Clovis was not first. Clovis was a latecomer to the Americas. We know that archaeology has not had its eye on the ball because of Clovis. They've not been considering the pre-Clovis ages. It's only now that they're beginning to look at what happened before Clovis. So they've just closed their eyes to all of those possibilities. And then, of course, on top of that, you have the massive destruction that took place in the Mississippi Valley and across the Americas of Native American culture and of Native American memories. So we're left with this puzzling series of mysteries which need to be explained. And as I go through the research, I find certain things ringing bells with me. I'm working in the Mississippi Valley. I'm at Moundville in Alabama, and I'm looking at a notice board. It's just the beginning of my research into this interesting culture in the Mississippi Valley. And the notice board has been put up by the site, and they're telling us about the site. And what they say is that the whole site was about afterlife beliefs, and that it was believed that on death, the soul of the deceased would ascend to the constellation of Orion, and then would pass through the constellation of Orion to the Milky Way, and then would make a journey along the Milky Way where it would face trials and tribulations and be judged on its behavior during life. The weird thing is, that's exactly the ancient Egyptian system of religion. It's exactly the system. It's too detailed to be a coincidence. What is that narrow star shaft in the Great Pyramid doing, if not pointing at the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt? To send the soul of the deceased up to Orion, then indeed a journey along the Milky Way, trials and tribulations, and a judgment. The same story exactly. But how do we explain that? Can it be a coincidence? No, I don't think so. So what's the answer to this? Could ancient Egypt have directly influenced the Mississippi Valley? Well, no, actually, because ancient Egypt has ceased to exist as a civilization by the time that many of the Mississippi Valley sites rose to prominence. Couldn't have happened then. The conclusion I come to is that what we're looking at in both areas, in ancient Egypt and in the Mississippi Valley, is a legacy of ideas from a remote common source, which actually influenced cultures all around the world. And it's why we find these astonishing similarities. I think a deliberate effort was made by the survivors of that cataclysm, those who came from the lost civilization. A deliberate effort was made by them to try to restart their civilization. And they used the hunter-gatherers with whom they coexisted in the world at that time as their seedbed to try to plant and re-establish these ideas. And that's why we find the same ideas cropping up all around the world in cultures that definitely were not in contact with one another. And trying to explain it by direct contact doesn't work. What does work is going far back, 12,000 plus years back, going right back to that time when these ideas were seeded all around the world.